It was close to midnight. The quiet kind of silence that settles over a peaceful suburban neighborhood, where even the streetlights seem half asleep. Inside a modest-looking country-style home, Chuck Norris sat alone in the living room, reading a worn-out tactical journal from his military days. A mug of herbal tea rested nearby, untouched. Despite his age, his posture was upright, breathing steady, disciplined like a soldier even at rest. Unknown to him, 2 police SUVs rolled quietly onto the street. Their headlights were off. A team of officers stepped out, armed and tense. They had received an anonymous tip that a dangerous fugitive was hiding inside this address. No warrant confirmed, no double checks, just suspicion and adrenaline. In hushed voices, one officer whispered, "This is it. Don't engage him, neutralize first." Another replied, "Intel says he's armed and unpredictable." They had no idea how accurate that was. Inside, Chuck lifted his eyes from the pages. Years of combat had sharpened his senses beyond normal. He felt a disturbance, not heard, not seen. Felt like the air itself shifted. He stood up slowly, calmly placed the journal on the table, and looked around the house. Something was off. He didn't run, didn't hide. He simply waited. Outside, the police team stacked up near the door. No announcement. No knock. Crack. The front door burst open, hinges tearing off. Within seconds, flashlights and weapons flooded in, slicing through the living room shadows. One officer shouted, "Hands where I can see them." Now, Chuck stared at them. Not angry, not scared. Just disappointed. He raised his hands slowly, saying nothing. The officers exchanged glances. To them, he was just an older man caught by surprise. They didn't recognize the calm in his eyes. The kind of calm that only exists in a man who has walked through war and never flinched. The kind of calm that said, "You just made the biggest mistake of your lives." But they were about to find out. The living room glowed with harsh beams of flashlight, sweeping across every corner. Officers moved in formation, boots thudding on polished wooden floor, radios crackling softly, fingers tight on triggers. Chuck Norris stood in the middle of the room, hands slightly raised, watching them without a trace of panic. One of the officers, a younger cop with arrogance etched across his face, stepped forward. "Sit down," he barked. Chuck didn't move. His voice was steady, almost too calm. "Do you have a warrant?" The officer ignored the question. "Check the rooms," he ordered. 2 officers split off and began searching the house recklessly, opening doors without permission. One overturned a drawer, another lifted a framed photograph of Chuck's military unit, completely oblivious to what it meant. In that photo were men whose names alone once made entire platoons stand at attention. Chuck's eyes briefly lingered on the photograph, memories flashing. But he said nothing. The young officer stepped closer, raising his flashlight directly at Chuck's eyes. "You living alone?" he asked harshly. "No," Chuck replied calmly. "I live with discipline. Try it sometime." A couple of officers snickered. The arrogant one didn't. "Don't get smart with me. We got intel a suspect was here." "Then your intel is wrong," Chuck said, "and your approach is worse." The officer stepped even closer, squaring up like he was trying to intimidate a civilian. He couldn't see the silent warning in Chuck's eyes, a warning that wasn't anger, but restraint. Behind them, an older officer, clearly nervous, called out from the hallway. "Nothing here, sir." "Check again," the younger one snapped. Another officer entered from the kitchen, whispering, "This place is too clean, looks like a veteran's house." Chuck responded without turning his head. "Looks can be misleading. You should know that." Beneath his calm exterior, Chuck was assessing exit options, number of intruders, tactical patterns. Years of Delta Force training kicked in, silently. Not to attack, to avoid bloodshed. The young cop stepped closer, poking Chuck's chest with 2 fingers. "You got something to hide, old man." Chuck's response was soft but sharp. "Son, nothing in this house is hidden. But a lot of things are not meant to be found." That statement hung in the air for a moment. A third officer entered, visibly uncomfortable. "Sir, we don't have proper authorization. Maybe we should step back and recheck." But he was cut short. "Don't question me," the arrogant cop yelled. Chuck observed the tension within the team. Some sensed something was off. Others were too fueled by ego to listen. A brief silence. Then Chuck slowly lowered his hands. Instantly, weapons were raised. Multiple laser dots focused on his chest. One officer shouted, "Don't move." Chuck replied, calmly. If I wanted to move, you wouldn't have seen it. That single sentence made several officers freeze. Not because of the words, because of the way they were said. With certainty. That's when one of the senior officers, still by the door, muttered, "Who? Who are you?" Chuck looked at them slowly. "I'm a citizen in his own home," he replied. "But the man standing before you once trained people to breach houses like you just did." The arrogant cop scoffed. "Yeah? Retired security guard or something?" Chuck looked him in the eye. "No," he said softly. "Something far worse." The cop's smirk faded just slightly. Before any further confrontation, Chuck glanced toward the camera, breaking the fourth wall of the story, connecting directly with the audience through narration. Where are you watching this story from right now? Drop your country or city below. Let's see how far Chuck's legend travels. Back to the scene. The officers searched further, frustration growing with each clear room. No suspect, no weapons, nothing illegal. But the tension was rising. The arrogant cop got back in Chuck's face. "You listen to me. This is my operation. One more word, and I'll have you detained." "That," Chuck said quietly, "would be your second mistake tonight." "And the first," the cop smirked. Chuck took a step forward, not aggressive, but with such controlled precision that officers instinctively stepped back. "The first," Chuck said, lowering his voice, "was entering my home without respect." The officer clenched his jaw. "You threatening me?" Chuck didn't blink. "No," he replied. "I'm warning you." He turned sideways, hands now lowered, his body shifted to a ready stance, casual to the untrained eye, fatal to anyone with tactical awareness. The youngest officer whispered to another, "There's something off about him." The arrogant one didn't hear. He should have. He was moments away from finding out. The footage transitions into slow motion. Inside the dimly lit corridor, the officers step cautiously, flashlights trembling slightly as they sweep across old family portraits, martial arts trophies, and commendation plaques stamped with the insignia of Delta Force Command Unit. The live audience erupts in shock, comments flooding the screen. "Wait, that's a special ops insignia. Bro, did they just break into a legend's house? I'm from Dubai watching this live. This is insane." As millions continue tuning in, the camera zooms past a shadowy figure emerging from the darkness. Chuck Norris steps forward, his posture calm yet fierce, his presence enough to silence even the officers. He's no longer just the man they thought was asleep in his home. He's their worst mistake. "What you just did is not only illegal," Chuck says, voice calm and intense. "It's suicidal." The chat explodes again. "I'm from New York. My heart is racing. Germany watching here. This is better than any action movie." He didn't shout. That's how you know he's dangerous. The lead officer, attempting to regain control, lifts his firearm. Before his finger even reaches the trigger, thud, Chuck moves with blinding speed. A perfectly calculated wrist lock disarms the officer, weapon clattering to the floor. Engagement spike. 2.4 million viewers live. The remaining officers react, but they're already too late. Years of covert operations have refined Chuck's reflexes beyond anything the legal force could ever train. A swift roundhouse kick sends the second officer into a wall. Another attempts a taser attack. Chuck catches it midair and calmly crushes it in his fist. He speaks again, staring directly into the live camera streaming everything globally. "I spent my life defending this country. Tonight, I defend my home." The audience goes wild. From London, goosebumps. Brazil here, this is unreal. Pakistan live, legend mode activated. The remaining officers begin retreating, but their radios crackle. Their commanding officer demands an update. Chuck looks at the security feed projection showing armed backup units approaching the house. He takes a breath. "If they step inside," he says softly, "I'll consider it an invasion. And I deal with invasions differently." The comment section blows up. 5 million watching live now. Tag Netflix. Make this a movie now. He talks like missions never ended. Suddenly, the national feed interrupts with breaking news flashes. Former Delta Force commander house raided. Legality under investigation. Phones across law enforcement command centers begin ringing. Someone messed up. Badly. Inside the house, Chuck kneels beside the officer he hit first, but doesn't hurt him further. "You're not my enemy," he says. "But whoever sent you might be." Engagement. 7.2 million active viewers. trending #1 worldwide. Live chats continue. I'm from Toronto. This man is pure discipline. India here. Look how he fights without anger. This isn't violence. This is precision. A tactical drone appears on the screen showing thermal visuals. The house is surrounded. As the sirens grow louder and floodlights bathe the exterior, Chuck pauses, looking toward his display cabinet, holding his Delta Force uniform and medals. He gently touches the glass. They thought I was retired. He turns back, eyes like steel. I never stopped being ready. The tension inside the house was thick enough to choke on. Every officer frozen in place, weapons trembling, adrenaline high, but none of them aware that they had just walked into a situation far beyond their training. Chuck Norris stood near the center of the living room, calm, focused, and alert. Every muscle in his body was coiled like a spring, ready to act, but only if necessary. He was not here to harm anyone unnecessarily, yet every move he made radiated lethal precision. The youngest officer, still holding his weapon in a shaky grip, whispered under his breath, I think he's serious." The arrogant officer, still trying to assert dominance, stepped closer. "Move to the corner," he barked. "You're under our control now." Chuck didn't flinch. He simply tilted his head slightly, as if observing a chessboard. "You're in my home," he said softly. "And control is not something you take. You earn it." The officers blinked, unsure how to respond. One of the older officers nervously glanced at the door. "Maybe we should call, backup?" The younger cop shook his head. "No, we can handle this. He's just—" Before he could finish, Chuck's eyes flicked to him. That slight glance, almost casual, carried a weight so heavy that the officer instinctively stepped back. Something about Chuck's calm energy was disarming. It wasn't fear, it was certainty. The kind of certainty only a Delta Force commander could project. The tension grew, almost unbearable. Officers shifted their weight nervously, flashlights cutting across Chuck's tactical medals on the wall and framed certificates of valor. It was then one of the bystanders, an off-duty officer observing the raid, murmured under his breath, "Wait, that's Chuck Norris. The real Chuck Norris." Whispers spread among the team. The arrogance and bravado that had fueled the younger officer moments ago began to crumble. Chuck's presence had shifted the energy in the room entirely. He was no longer just a civilian. They were face-to-face with a living legend, trained to deal with threats far greater than them. The arrogant officer didn't believe it. "You're joking," he said, stepping closer. "That's impossible. He's just some retired martial artist." Chuck's smile was small but cold. "Do you want to test that theory?" The officer laughed nervously, trying to hide his unease. "We have the law." "We—" Chuck interrupted him, stepping forward slowly. "Law doesn't make you right. Courage, discipline, and respect, those make you right." A few officers fumbled with their radios, calling for backup. The sound of sirens in the distance was growing louder, but inside the house, it was silent, charged silence. Every officer was aware of the unspoken rule. One wrong move, and they could be incapacitated before help arrived. Chuck walked past the younger officer and stopped near a doorway, his hand grazing the wooden frame. Every step deliberate, measured, confident. He turned his gaze toward the lead cop. "You've made 2 mistakes tonight," he said quietly. "First, breaking into a home without a warrant. Second, underestimating who lives there." The officer froze, realizing that the weight behind those words was not just age or experience. It was deadly precision honed over decades in combat. Meanwhile, a live feed on one officer's phone went viral. Comments poured in from every corner of the globe. "I'm watching from Mexico City. This is unreal." From London, "He hasn't even moved and he's already dominating the room." India here. "This is better than any action movie I've ever seen." The audience could sense the unspoken tension. Every viewer knew one thing. These officers had no idea what they were dealing with. The arrogant officer stepped forward again, trying to regain control. "Back up. All of you, step back." Chuck's eyes narrowed. "Step back," he asked. "No. You step back because you respect boundaries you do not own." The officers' hands wavered on their weapons. Chuck's calm, unwavering energy radiated authority without a single aggressive motion. He didn't need to strike. They could feel the consequences if he did. Then came a pause. One senior officer, clearly trying to salvage the situation, whispered, "He's Delta Force. He's real military." A ripple of shock went through the room. The young cop's hands trembled. The arrogant officer's bravado cracked. The realization hit them all at once. They were outmatched, outclassed, and lucky to be alive. Chuck stepped toward the center of the room, arms folded, eyes piercing. The silence was deafening. Outside, the backup units approached, sirens blaring, lights flashing, but inside, it was clear who held control. Chuck didn't need to fight. They were already defeated in will and understanding. If you were in this situation, would you stay calm like Chuck or confront them like the officers? Comment your choice below. Chuck's presence alone turned a chaotic raid into a lesson in discipline, control, and respect. And yet, the story was far from over. The officers froze, the weight of the silence pressing down on them. Chuck Norris stood in the center of the living room, calm, composed, yet radiating an authority that no uniform, badge, or gun could match. Every officer in that house suddenly realized they had been outmaneuvered mentally, tactically, and morally, without a single punch thrown. The youngest officer, still pale and shaking, whispered under his breath, I think he's not kidding. He's Delta Force. The arrogant officer scoffed, trying to regain his composure. Delta Force? You're joking. Retired special forces don't live in the suburbs like this. Chuck slowly turned his head and gave a small, measured smile. You think my retirement changes my skill? Or my vigilance? I've walked into far worse situations than this. And I've seen men much like you. Overconfident, underprepared, and foolish. The room went silent. Even the officer who had been fidgeting nervously found his jaw tight. He couldn't argue, couldn't justify what they had done. The reality was sinking in. They had broken into the home of a legendary military commander. Then, the senior officer who had arrived late into the raid finally spoke. His voice trembled, half awe, half fear. Sir, that's Chuck Norris, former Delta Force commander. The reports, the medals, we. The arrogant officer froze mid-step. What? You mean the Chuck Norris? His words came out shaky, disbelief etched on his face. Yes, Chuck replied, his tone calm, but now carrying a subtle edge that made the air feel heavier. The very same. And tonight, you made the worst mistake you could have. One of the younger officers, now shaking uncontrollably, muttered, Sir, we didn't know. We had no idea. Chuck's eyes scanned the room, locking on each of them in turn. Ignorance is forgivable. Disrespect and recklessness are not. You broke into a home without cause, brandished weapons, and threatened civilians. Me, my family, and my property. That ends tonight. The arrogant officer tried to speak, but his voice failed him. His bravado evaporated in an instant, replaced with the humbling weight of reality. Chuck's calm energy was suffocating. Not physically, but mentally. Then Chuck's phone buzzed. A live feed of the raid was streaming online. Millions of viewers were watching globally. Comments flooded in. I'm watching from Tokyo. This is insane. New York here. Chuck Norris is calm but terrifying. India live. These cops are about to regret everything. Chuck turned slightly, addressing both the officers and the live audience. Strength without control is chaos. Authority without respect is dangerous. Tonight, you've experienced both. One of the officers stumbled back, finally lowering his weapon completely. Another knelt instinctively, as if acknowledging the power and discipline standing before them. Chuck didn't need to raise a hand. They already understood who they were facing. Your mistake wasn't facing me, Chuck said softly. Your mistake was underestimating me. And worse, underestimating the consequences of your actions. The senior officer finally stepped forward, his tone contrite. We apologize, sir. We didn't know. We didn't. Chuck held up a hand. Apologies are words. Actions teach lessons. Tonight, you've learned that breaking the law and disrespecting boundaries comes at a cost. Let this be your lesson, and let it spread. A few officers dared to glance at each other. They had been arrogant, reckless, and foolish, but now they were humbled. The reality of who they had confronted was etched into their minds forever. Meanwhile, online, the story went viral in minutes. Clips from the raid circulated. From London, he handled an entire SWAT team alone. From Sydney, this is insane. Chuck Norris didn't even fight aggressively, yet he dominates. From Rio de Janeiro, this is true power and control. Chuck spoke once more, his voice calm but firm. Respect is not given because of fear, money, or power. Respect is earned through discipline, humility, and action. You violated that principle tonight. Let it never happen again. The officers, humbled beyond words, quietly exited the house under his watchful gaze. Not one dared to protest or challenge him further. Outside, the backup units had arrived, but the situation was already resolved. Chuck's presence alone had neutralized a potentially violent encounter without spilling a drop of blood. As the cameras captured every detail, viewers continued flooding the comments section, trending worldwide. I'm from Toronto. This is discipline personified. Dubai Live. That man is pure control. Brazil, what a legend. Humility and strength in one. Chuck glanced at the camera one last time, a faint smile crossing his face. You don't need to fight to prove strength. You only need to control yourself and demand respect for what is right. The officers left, humbled. The house was secure, and the world now knew exactly who they had tried to challenge. The police officers slowly exited Chuck Norris's home, the weight of the night pressing on their shoulders. Each step was heavy, not with fatigue, but with embarrassment and realization. They had come armed, confident, and convinced they were in control. But they had just faced a man whose calm alone dominated the room. Not just a retired martial artist, but a seasoned Delta Force commander whose presence conveyed lethal precision without aggression. Outside, backup units lined the street, flashing lights illuminating the neighborhood. Reporters had already begun arriving, cell phone cameras capturing every detail. Within minutes, the footage streamed online, going viral across multiple platforms. Millions were watching. New York here, this is insane. The cops got humbled by Chuck Norris. London, this is the most disciplined man I've ever seen. India Live. Respect earned without a single shot fired. The officers were interviewed by a senior command, their apologies nervous and forced. We didn't know, sir, one officer stammered. Chuck Norris, standing calmly by the doorway, spoke softly, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Discipline and respect are earned through action, not fear. Tonight, you've learned a lesson you will not forget. Let it shape your decisions from now on. The arrogant officer, still pale and trembling, looked at him, unable to meet his gaze. We understand, sir. Chuck's eyes scanned the street, taking in every officer, every bystander, every camera trained on him. His demeanor was unshakable, his patience absolute. He did not raise a hand, did not shout, and yet the room, no, the entire block, was under his control. That he continued. You have a duty to protect and respect civilians. That duty is greater than fear, protocol, or ego. Tonight, you failed in every one of those areas. A few officers murmured among themselves, realizing the depth of their error. One whispered to another, this isn't just about breaking the law. This is him, Chuck Norris. The man doesn't need to fight, and yet he could have stopped every one of us instantly. The viral stream exploded. Comments from around the world poured in. From Tokyo, discipline personified. Brazil watching live. He didn't even strike, but he dominated. Toronto, this is teaching respect the right way. One officer finally asked, hesitantly, Sir, what now? Chuck looked down the street, then back at them. Calmly, deliberately. Now you go back. Reflect. Train. Learn. And remember, power without respect is meaningless. Authority without wisdom is dangerous. The officers nodded silently. They were humbled. Not one dared to question him again. The realization hit them fully. They had been lucky to leave alive, and luck alone would not always save them in the future. Meanwhile, online, millions continued discussing the events. Clips of Chuck's calm movements, his precise gestures, and the officer's reaction went viral within minutes. Hashtags trended globally. Hashtag Chuck Norris Delta Force. Hashtag respect earned not given. Hashtag humbling the arrogant. Viewers flooded the comment sections. I'm watching from Mexico City. That calm energy is terrifying but beautiful. London Live. Absolute legend. Dubai here. Discipline over fear. Respect over chaos. Chuck glanced at the cameras one last time, addressing the world. True strength isn't shown through violence or intimidation. It's shown through restraint, control, and respect. Let this moment remind everyone. Respect is earned, not demanded. Always act with discipline, whether you hold authority or follow it. The cops walked away, their heads lowered, a mix of shame and awe in their expressions. The neighborhood, which had erupted in tension just moments ago, was now quiet, filled with admiration for the man who had turned a potentially dangerous raid into a lesson in restraint and integrity. The online community continued to buzz, millions sharing, commenting, and reflecting. Chuck's message of humility, courage, and respect spread like wildfire. It wasn't just about stopping an illegal raid. It was about teaching the world how to wield power responsibly. If you believe that authority should always act with respect and responsibility, type respect in the comments and share where you're watching from. Chuck didn't gloat, didn't boast, didn't celebrate. He simply returned inside his home, closing the door with the calm of a man who knew he had done the right thing. Outside, cameras continued to roll, but Chuck's lesson had already been delivered, firmly, silently, and unforgettably. The world had seen firsthand that real power is not in weapons or titles, but in restraint, awareness, and respect. The neighborhood had returned to an uneasy calm, but the story was far from over. By morning, clips of the illegal raid, Chuck Norris's calm dominance, and the officer's humbling had gone viral worldwide. Millions were watching, sharing, and commenting, captivated by the unprecedented events. The internet had erupted overnight. Chuck Norris, retired Delta Force commander, had single-handedly turned a reckless police raid into a lesson in discipline, control, and respect. News outlets ran headlines across the globe. Delta Force legend thwarts illegal police raid. Cops humbled. Chuck Norris shows true power is in restraint. Viral video. Retired commander faces armed officers without a fight. Viewers from every continent flooded social media with their reactions. From London, this man is the definition of calm authority. New York here. I can't believe what I just saw. India. He didn't fight, yet the cops were completely intimidated. Chuck Norris watched the news coverage quietly from his living room. He didn't smile boastfully, nor did he gloat. Instead, he reflected on the message the world had just witnessed. Real strength is measured not by aggression, but by restraint and wisdom. The officers involved were investigated internally. Their illegal actions were documented, disciplinary measures enforced, and public apologies were issued. Yet Chuck never pressed charges. He wasn't interested in revenge. His only goal had been teaching a lesson, one that extended beyond a single police team. In his calm, methodical way, Chuck addressed the press in a statement. Authority without respect is dangerous. Strength without control is reckless. Tonight, the lesson was simple. Respect is earned, not demanded. This applies to anyone, anywhere, whether wielding a badge or not. Across the globe, millions resonated with his words. Engagement surged like wildfire. Comments, shares, and reactions spiked, all fueled by admiration for the man who had handled danger without a single act of reckless violence. Social media trends skyrocketed. Hashtag Chuck Norris Delta Force. Hashtag respect earned not given. Hashtag discipline over fear. Fans, military enthusiasts, and ordinary viewers alike joined in conversation. I'm from Dubai. I've never seen calm like this. Toronto. Chuck didn't fight aggressively, yet commanded respect instantly. Tokyo. This is what true leadership looks like. Meanwhile, Chuck returned to his family, a quiet hero in a home now safe once again. He trained, reflected, and maintained the disciplined lifestyle that had guided him throughout his life. His home, once threatened by ignorance, had become a symbol, a lesson for anyone who underestimated power combined with wisdom. The story spread so fast that educators, law enforcement trainers, and leadership experts began using it as a case study. How discipline, calmness, and situational awareness could prevent unnecessary violence. Yet amidst all the accolades and viral attention, Chuck remained grounded. To him, the point wasn't fame. It was teaching a principle. Strength without integrity is meaningless. He looked directly into the camera, the final message clear and commanding. Respect should never depend on fear, money, or status. It is earned through discipline, action, and humility. Stand up for what is right, but never forget, control is the greatest power of all. If you believe that strength and respect go hand in hand, type respect in the comments and tell us your country. Share this story to inspire others worldwide. The story ended not with a battle or confrontation, but with a lesson the world would never forget. Millions had witnessed that real power is not about fear or weapons, but discipline, control, and unwavering integrity. Chuck Norris had turned a dangerous raid into a global symbol of respect and authority, a lesson for officers, civilians, and viewers everywhere. And as the sun set over his quiet neighborhood, Chuck trained alone in the living room, a man at peace with himself and the world, ready for anything, but always calm, always in control.